Tessa Orwin's heels snapped the second she stepped into the crosswalk, and that's when the car came flying around the corner. A horn blared, tires screeched, and her heart jumped into her throat. She didn't have time to scream. A strong arm yanked her back so hard she stumbled into someone's chest just as the black SUV whipped past, missing her by inches. "Oh my God," she gasped, clutching the man's shirt as the world spun. That thing almost hit me." "You okay?" the man asked, his voice rough and out of breath. He steadied her with both hands, and for the first time she looked up. He was tall, really tall and broad, with messy dark hair, a 5 o'clock shadow, and kind eyes that looked like he hadn't slept in days. A little girl peeked out from behind his leg, holding a juice box in one hand and a stuffed bunny in the other. The man glanced down at the child. "Kara, stay right here," then back at Tessa. "You hurt?" No, she breathed, brushing her hair off her face. "Just shaken, thank you." "You saved my life." "Yeah, well, don't thank me yet," he muttered, running a hand over his face. "I shouldn't have let you step into the road without looking." She blinked. "You think this was your fault?" He scratched his neck, clearly uncomfortable. "I should have said something." "You looked distracted." Tessa's lips twitched. "I was thinking about firing my CFO, actually." His eyebrows lifted. "You're a boss," she smiled. "Something like that," he chuckled. "Well, I'm Mark Lawson, and this is Kara. She's 5, obsessed with dinosaurs, and thinks traffic lights are decoration." Tessa crouched and smiled at the little girl. "Hey, Kara, I'm Tessa." Kara grinned and offered the bunny. "This is Barry, he's scared of cars too." Tessa laughed and took the bunny gently. "Nice to meet you, Barry." Mark looked at his watch and sighed. "We're headed to story time at the library, but I think we missed it." Tessa stood again. "You know what? I can make it up to you. There's a bakery around the corner. Best cinnamon rolls in Manhattan, my treat." Mark hesitated. "You don't have to, I want to. You literally saved my life." He glanced at Kara, who was already tugging his hand. "Cinnamon, Kara's vote is in," Tessa said, walking backward toward the bakery. "You coming?" Mark stared at her for a beat, then smiled, small but real. "Yeah." "All right." The bakery was cozy, warm, and smelled like sugar and cinnamon and nostalgia. Kara sat at the window with a chocolate milk mustache, swinging her legs as she chattered about tea rixes and jelly beans. Mark sat across from Tessa, his coffee untouched. "So, what do you really do?" Tessa sipped her espresso. "I run a company, tech. We build software for private security services." He blinked. "That's specific." "It's my company. I started it after grad school." "Wait," he said slowly, "you're the CEO?" "Yeah," she shrugged like it wasn't a big deal. "I don't usually lead with that." He sat back. "Wow, that's impressive." "I didn't do it alone." Mark smiled a little. "Still. You don't look like the kind of woman who nearly gets hit by a car." Tessa laughed. "I'm not, usually." They both looked at Kara, who was now making Barry the bunny wear a napkin as a cape. "So," Tessa said carefully, "is your wife working today?" Mark blinked, then laughed. "Oh, no wife. It's just me and Kara." She tilted her head. "Single dad." "Yeah," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. "Kara's mom left when she was 2, haven't heard from her since." Tessa's heart squeezed. "That's awful." He gave a half smile. "It's all right. Kara's everything." There was something about the way he said it so full of quiet love and strength that hit Tessa in a place she wasn't expecting. She leaned forward. "You know, I don't usually eat cinnamon rolls with total strangers and their adorable daughters." He grinned. "Yeah, me neither. But apparently I also don't usually save CEOs from traffic." They both laughed. Outside, the city was moving again, horns, chatter, life. Tessa glanced at her watch. "I've got a meeting in 20 minutes. Mark nodded. "Of course, important CEO things." She hesitated. "But I'd like to see you again, both of you." He looked surprised. "Really?" "I meant what I said. You saved my life." He looked at her, something unreadable in his eyes. "All right, sure, I mean, if you're okay with cinnamon on everything." She smiled. "I like cinnamon." Kara waved from beside him. "Bye, Tessa." Tessa crouched to hug her. "Bye, Kara and Barry." She stood, looked at Mark, and said softly, "Don't disappear, okay?" "I won't," he said. She turned and walked away, heels clicking, heart pounding. She didn't know what this was, but she hadn't smiled like that in a long time. And Mark Lawson, the tired, soft-eyed dad who pulled her back from the edge, was now all she could think about. Tessa adjusted the strap of her handbag as she stepped into the mirrored elevator of the Orwin Tech headquarters, her mind still tangled in the sound of Kara's laughter and the careful way Mark had held her arm when they crossed the bakery threshold. She was late, but for once, she didn't care. The elevator doors opened directly to the executive floor, and her assistant, Bree, was already waiting. Boardroom, now. The investors moved the meeting up by half an hour. They're already seated. Tessa nodded and walked with purpose, her heels silent on the thick carpet. She entered the boardroom to find 12 sharp-eyed men and women watching her with the kind of eager impatience that only large sums of capital could inspire. She smiled coolly and started the meeting without preamble. Let's begin. It wasn't until 2 hours later, after fielding aggressive questions about quarterly projections and reining in one particularly arrogant shareholder who suggested they cut back on the philanthropic branch, that she finally closed her laptop and stood. Unless anyone else would like to explain how cutting our social impact initiatives will improve our long-term valuation, I think we're done here. No one spoke. They never did when she used that tone. Back in her office, she kicked off her heels and dropped into the leather chair behind her desk. Bree appeared with a fresh latte and a folder. Your calendar's clear for the next hour. You've got a charity gala next week, black tie, all the usual suspects, and this came by courier. Tessa opened the folder. Inside was a photo of her father Young, smiling, back when he still had hope, and a handwritten note from a foundation he'd once championed. She hadn't seen that photo in years. Her chest tightened. After Bree left, she stared at the picture, her thoughts drifting back to Mark. She didn't know where he worked, what he did for a living, or how he afforded to live in Manhattan with a child on his own. But the way he'd looked at Kara like the world rose and fell with her stayed with her longer than she expected. The next afternoon, she found herself scanning the sidewalks near the library, the bakery, even the playground 2 blocks down. She told herself it was coincidence. She needed coffee. She liked walking, but she was searching, and she knew it. She spotted them on a park bench beneath a sprawling elm tree. Kara was coloring in a battered notebook with a pack of crayons, and Mark was reading from a worn paperback, his head tilted toward her voice as she narrated her drawing. Tessa approached slowly. Mark looked up, surprised but not displeased. "Hey," he said, setting the book aside, "didn't expect to see you in kid territory." "I was in the neighborhood," Tessa said, lifting a brow. "Besides, someone promised me more cinnamon. I'm just following up." Kara leapt to her feet. "Tessa." "Barry drew a dragon, did he now?" Tessa said, crouching beside her. "Let me see." She examined the scribbles as Kara explained each one with serious enthusiasm. Mark watched her quietly, his face unreadable. Once Kara returned to her art, Tessa sat beside him. "You always read in the park." "Sometimes," Mark replied. "It gives her space to run around, and books don't ask for rent." Tessa glanced at him. "What do you do, Mark?" He hesitated. "Construction, mostly freelance." "I was managing sites before Kara came to live with me full-time, but it's hard to do that and be the one picking her up, cooking, doing bedtime. You can't exactly tell a 5-year-old to wait through a crane inspection." "So you gave it up," he shrugged. "I scaled it back, took smaller jobs." "It's not glamorous, but it keeps us fed." She looked at him more closely. He was wearing a dark gray hoodie, slightly frayed at the cuff, and jeans that had seen better days. But his shoes were clean, his daughter's curls neatly tied back, and her backpack was patched with care. "You ever think of doing something else?" she asked. He gave a short laugh. "You offering me a job, maybe," she said, watching his reaction. "I know people who need solid project managers, people who show up. People who can pull someone out of traffic without panicking." Mark glanced at her, something flickering behind his eyes. "Why are you here, Tessa?" She blinked. "I told you, cinnamon." "No," he said, voice low. "Why are you really here?" "You run a company. You probably spend your nights at galas and rooftop parties. Why are you sitting on a park bench with a kid and a guy who sometimes skips lunch so she can have hers?" Tessa didn't answer right away. She looked at Kara, who was now trying to teach Barry the alphabet. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Maybe because you're the first person I've met in a long time who didn't ask for anything, who didn't want anything from me. Mark looked away. That's because I didn't know who you were, and now you do, she said. Does it change anything? He didn't look at her. I don't know yet. A silence stretched between them, not uncomfortable but full of unspoken things. Kara tugged on her dad's sleeve. Can we get ice cream before we go home? Mark looked at Tessa. You want to come? She hesitated. Only if Barry says it's okay, Kara beamed. He loves ice cream, right, Barry? Mark stood and held out his hand. Come on then, let's see if we can find the kind with sprinkles. Tessa took it without thinking, her fingers brushing his, solid, warm. And just like that, she was walking down a city sidewalk with a man whose world was nothing like hers, and a little girl who'd already carved out a corner of her heart. She didn't know where this was going, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she had to know. The gala was held at the Glass House, a towering structure suspended above the Hudson, all steel beams and floor-to-ceiling windows that glittered with candlelight and wealth. Tessa stood near the entrance in a sleek black gown, her hair swept into a low twist, her posture effortless. She wasn't used to nerves, but tonight was different. She hadn't seen Mark since the ice cream shop. That had been 4 days ago, not because she hadn't wanted to, but because everything inside her had screamed to slow down and everything else had begged to keep going. Miss Orwin, said a velvet voice behind her. She turned to see Charles Lannister, one of the more persistent investors in Orwin Tech, offering his hand and a smile too wide to be genuine. You look ravishing. She accepted his handshake with a nod. Thank you, Charles. I trust you've read my proposal on the logistics acquisition. I have, she said, eyes scanning the crowd. We'll discuss it next quarter. He leaned in slightly. I hope you'll let me take you to dinner before then. You're the only CEO I know who makes quarterly earnings look like a game of chess. She stepped back just enough to make her point. I don't mix boardrooms and date nights. Charles's smile faltered, but he recovered quickly, muttering something about the bar as he drifted away. She hated these events. The networking, the half-truths, the way people looked at her like a trophy instead of a person. But tonight she had a reason to stay, because she'd invited him. She'd told herself he wouldn't come. That he didn't have a suit or the right shoes or the patience for pretension, that it was too much too fast. But then, as the string quartet shifted into a modern arrangement and the doors opened again, she saw him, Mark. He wore a perfectly tailored navy jacket over a white shirt, no tie and dark slacks that looked borrowed but pressed. His hair was combed back, not styled, just neat. Kara wasn't with him, Tessa had insisted. She knew a sitter who specialized in overnights and had made sure everything was arranged. Mark caught her eye and froze just inside the entrance. She walked toward him, heart thudding in her ribs. You're here, she said, stopping just in front of him. He nodded once, hands in his pockets. Wasn't sure I should be. I'm glad you are. He looked around at the glittering crowd. This isn't really my scene. It's not mine either, she said quietly. But tonight it feels less impossible. His eyes finally met hers. You look like you belong in a painting. She didn't answer, just took his hand and led him through the crowd. They stood near the balcony, away from the gold and glass, watching the river shimmer below. So, he said after a long silence, what exactly happens at one of these things? People drink, she said. They pretend they care about climate change and then they write checks so big they never feel the loss. Mark chuckled, low and rough. And you? I try to keep the ones who mean well from getting eaten alive. He studied her. You always carry that much weight, she turned to face him. I used to think it was part of the job. Now, I don't know. He looked down at their hands. I've never been anywhere like this. I almost turned around at the door. Why didn't you? Mark lifted his gaze again. Because you asked me to come. Before she could speak, a voice behind them interrupted. There you are, said a woman in a tight silver dress. Tessa, darling, we need you for the donor photo. Tessa glanced at Mark. Give me 5 minutes, he nodded once. I'm not going anywhere. By the time she returned, he'd moved to the far corner of the balcony, leaning on the railing, watching the water. She joined him, silent for a moment. I should have warned you, she said. This is what my world looks like most nights. I don't mind the noise, Mark replied. It's just different. She touched the railing beside him. You don't have to stay. I don't want to leave, he said softly. But I need to ask you something. Anything? He turned to her, his expression unreadable. Is this a game to you? He asked. A break from your board meetings and private cars, because I can't afford to be someone's temporary escape. Tessa's spine straightened. Do I seem like the kind of woman who plays games? No, he said. But I've seen people pretend they care before and then disappear. She stepped forward. I wasn't pretending. I'm not pretending now. Mark searched her face. So what is this? I don't know yet, she admitted. But I want to find out. He exhaled like he hadn't realized he'd been holding breath. I've got a lot of rough edges, Tessa. So do I, she said. Mine just come wrapped in silk. He laughed under his breath. Fair, she looked at him. You don't have to fit in here. You just have to be you. He slowly reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I don't think I've ever met anyone like you. Good, she whispered, because I've never met anyone like you either. A breeze swept across the river, cool and unexpected. She stepped closer. He didn't move. Inside, the music swelled again. A different world, one that didn't belong to either of them completely. But out here, in the space between two very different lives, something real was blooming, and neither of them wanted to let it go. Mark stood in the quiet of Tessa's penthouse kitchen, barefoot on the polished stone floors, the early morning light turning the glass cabinets a soft gold. He poured hot water over tea leaves, hands moving with familiar rhythm. The skyline beyond the windows stretched endlessly, but his thoughts were fixed on the soft murmur of voices from the next room. Kara was curled on the sofa in matching pajamas with Tessa, both of them whispering over a picture book she'd brought from home. The sitter had dropped her off early, and instead of rushing into her usual morning meetings, Tessa had insisted on canceling them all. Mark watched from the doorway, arms folded loosely as Kara pointed out a page and Tessa nodded, her expression focused and patient. It was a version of her he hadn't seen before, unhurried, barefoot, wrapped in a cashmere robe, and it made something tighten in his chest. I wasn't sure she'd feel comfortable here, he said, setting the mugs down on the side table. Tessa glanced up. She asked if she could sleep over next week. Mark sat beside them. Did she now? Kara nodded solemnly. Barry likes the soft pillows, he laughed, low and warm. Of course he does. Tessa looked at him differently now, no longer with curiosity, but with something settled, grounded. Still fierce, but no longer guarded. I've been thinking, she said, sliding a bookmark into the spine. About what you said the night of the gala. Mark met her eyes. Which part? That you needed to know if this was real, if it was something temporary. He didn't answer, just waited. Tessa reached for Kara's hand and squeezed it gently, then looked back at him. I don't want temporary, I've done that, and it never looked like this. He watched her carefully, then nodded once. Neither do I. Kara leaned over and whispered something that made Tessa laugh softly. Mark's chest ached at the sound. It was the kind of laugh that didn't come often, the kind that came when someone forgot they were supposed to be protecting themselves. I talked to someone, Tessa said after a beat, about a project manager position. One that could be remote when needed with benefits. I didn't use your name, just asked what it would take to create a role for someone with your background. Mark frowned slightly. You're trying to fix things for me. I'm trying to make space, she said, not rescue. Just open a door. He looked away for a second, jaw tight, then nodded slowly. Okay, Tessa leaned forward. Okay, I'm not proud, he said, but I'm not too proud to build something better. Kara looked between them. Are we getting pancakes now? Mark stood and lifted her easily into his arms. We are definitely getting pancakes. Tessa followed them to the kitchen, where Kara chose chocolate chips and berries for toppings. Mark made the batter from scratch, and Tessa handled the griddle. The kitchen filled with the smell of vanilla and sugar, and for the first time in a long time, there was no rush, no calls waiting, no headlines looming. As they ate, Kara babbled about a school art show, and Tessa offered to help her design a banner. Mark listened, smiling slowly as he watched them. He'd spent so long holding himself back, bracing for when things fell apart, but nothing was cracking. Nothing was slipping away. After breakfast, he helped Tessa clean up while Kara drew at the table, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. You know, he said, wiping his hands on a towel, I've been trying to figure out what this is. Tessa raised an eyebrow. And I think this is a beginning. She stepped close, resting her hand on his chest. Then let's start it right. He leaned down, kissed her slow, steady, certain. It wasn't rushed or desperate. It was a promise. Later that afternoon, they took Kara to the botanical gardens. She skipped ahead, counting butterflies and naming each one. Tessa walked beside Mark, their hands brushing. "Do you remember what I said the day we met?" she asked quietly. "That you were thinking about firing your CFO," she laughed. "Yes, but more than that. I remember thinking my life was too full to make room for anything that wasn't structured, predictable." Mark glanced at her. "And now I know the best parts are the ones you don't plan for." He pulled her gently toward him as they stopped beneath a flowering archway. "That's good. Because I never had a plan either." They kissed again carefully, like they knew it mattered. And it did, not because it was perfect or easy or scripted, but because it had started with a second-long decision and turned into something whole. And as Kara called out for them to come see a butterfly land on Barry's nose, they didn't hesitate. They walked toward her together. The rain had started just before they reached the courthouse steps, a soft, misting drizzle that dampened the sidewalks, but didn't chase away the crowd gathered for the city's annual public grant awards. Tessa stood beneath a shared umbrella with Mark, their shoulders touching, watching as Kara clutched a folder to her chest like it held national secrets. "Are you sure she wants to do this?" Mark asked, eyeing the line of children waiting to present their community project ideas. "She's 5, she insisted, and she practiced her speech 6 times this morning." Kara turned and held up a hand. "No peeking." Tessa bit back a laugh. "Understood, boss." They waited as the children took their turns under the big white tent where local officials and judges sat near a modest stage. Kara's name was called last. She marched up with purpose, unfolded her paper, and began. "My project is called Barry's Garden," she declared. "It's for kids who don't have backyards. We'll grow carrots and tomatoes and sunflowers, and everyone can help, even stuffed animals." The crowd laughed gently, but the judges leaned in. Kara continued, explaining that she wanted a place where people could feel better when they were sad, and where grown-ups could talk about big feelings while planting things. When she finished, she took a deep bow. The applause was louder than expected. Later, while Kara explored the tent with a juice box in one hand and Barry tucked under her arm, Mark turned to Tessa. "I didn't even know she was thinking about that, the garden thing. She asked me last week if plants could make people feel safe," Tessa said. "I told her yes." He was quiet for a moment. "You told her the kind of thing I didn't know how to say. She listens to you more than you think," she said. "She just needed a different vocabulary." Mark looked at her, the lines in his face softer than they had been weeks ago, his eyes clearer. "I keep trying to understand how this all happened so fast," he said. "Every time I think I've caught up, you do something else that knocks the wind out of me." "I'm not trying to move fast," she said, "but I'm not going to pretend I don't want this." He stepped closer. "You want this, me, Kara?" "All of it. I want the mornings where you're making tea in my kitchen. I want the nights when she's asleep and we're still talking on the couch hours later. I want the hard conversations, the messy parts. I want the life we're building." Mark exhaled slowly. "Then I guess I've got to start believing I deserve it." "You do," she said. "And you're not alone in it anymore." They walked back toward the car slowly, Kara skipping ahead in rain boots, humming a tune that didn't quite have a rhythm. Inside the car, she fell asleep almost instantly. Mark glanced at her through the rearview mirror, then turned to Tessa. "I never told you how I got that job you found for me," he said. "The project manager role." She tilted her head. "No," they said. Someone called ahead. "Told them I was honest, relentless, and knew how to build things from nothing. They didn't mention your name, but I knew." "It's true," she said. "Every word of it. They're putting me on the Midtown expansion. It's a big deal. I'll be overseeing a whole block." Tessa smiled. "Then I'll make sure our security firm doesn't mess up your site." His expression turned serious. "I want to do more than build things for other people. I want to build something with you, not just the life stuff. We've already started that. I mean a future we design together. You're not the only builder here," she said. "I've been laying foundations since I was 22, but I've never built anything that mattered this much." He leaned in, kissed her slowly, reverently, not like a question but like a statement. They drove the rest of the way home in easy silence. When they arrived, the building's doorman greeted them with a wide grin and a small box. "This came for you, Miss Orwin. Hand-delivered." Tessa opened it upstairs while Mark unpacked Kara's art supplies. Inside was a miniature model of a garden, tiny rows of vegetables, a sunflower patch, and a wooden sign that read Barry's Garden. Underneath was a note from the city council. "Approved, grant enclosed." Kara squealed when she saw it. "We can really do it." Mark lifted her into his arms. "Looks like it." Tessa knelt beside them, placing the model on the coffee table. "We'll find a space. I already know a few lots being rezoned. I'll make the calls." Kara clapped. "Barry said he wants to plant strawberries first." Mark kissed her forehead. "Strawberries it is." That night, after Kara had fallen asleep beneath a blanket of stars projected on her ceiling, Mark and Tessa sat on the balcony wrapped in a single throw, watching the city below. "I've been thinking about something," Mark said. "Tell me. I want to ask you one thing. And I need you to answer without hesitation." She turned to him, heart already racing. "Okay. Will you move in with me?" She blinked. "You want me to move into your apartment?" He laughed. "No, I want to move into yours, ours. I want to be where you are, permanently." Tessa didn't hesitate. "Yes." They kissed beneath the quiet sky, the city humming below, the world finally aligned in a way that felt like home. They moved in together 2 weeks later. Kara planted her first seeds in a raised bed behind a neighborhood rec center. They painted the sign together, and Barry watched from a lawn chair. Tessa started working fewer nights. Mark brought his blueprints home. They argued sometimes about small things, laundry, who left the lights on, but the arguments never stuck. They always ended with apologies and laughter and the knowledge that they were both still learning. Together. One evening, after dinner with friends and a walk through the garden under strung lights, Mark pulled a small velvet box from his pocket. "I don't have a speech," he said. "But I do have a question." Tessa didn't need to hear it to know. She said yes before he even opened it. They married 6 months later in a ceremony that included chocolate chip pancakes, sunflowers, and one very well-dressed stuffed bunny. And in the quiet moments after the music faded, with Kara asleep upstairs and the city glittering beyond their windows, they held each other and knew they'd found something rare, not perfect, but permanent, and deeply, irrevocably theirs.